Welcome back to the Connected podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you an extraordinary collection in which some incredible students take the driver's seat and host dynamic conversations with professionals from across the higher education sector, discussing the vital topic of student belonging. Up next is Louise Salter, talking to Professor Bridgette Bewick from the University of Leeds. Bridgette holds a chair in psychological health, wellbeing and education. Her portfolio of scholarship and research continues to advance understanding of developing and implementing compassionate pedagogies, facilitating belonging, supporting wellbeing and reducing mental distress within higher education.
So, Bridgette, tell us a bit about yourself. What motivated you to work in student belonging?
Thanks. That's a great opening question. And I want to say a special thank you for pronouncing my name correct. As you said, I'm Bridgette Bewick. I'm a professor at the University of Leeds. Although I work in the School of Medicine, my home discipline is actually psychology. And it was my trying to understand and support student mental health and well-being that led me to belonging, actually. And you might ask, what's the link? Well, after years dedicated to understanding student mental health, working with services to think about how we might do things differently, speaking to students about what impact changes were having on them, I realized that despite all the gains we'd made, all the additional services, support, ways of thinking about it, monitoring over time, despite all of that, the approach wasn't working. We still had the same issue.
Okay.
And so continuing to focus on students themselves as individuals wasn't the answer. And so I started asking questions about systems and how they help or hinder students and staff actually to thrive. So I started to focus less on the individual and instead looked at the injustices that are embedded into how we so-called do higher education.
Right.
And I started asking if it was possible to create a more compassionate higher education experience. So long story short, part of creating a more compassionate campus is developing ways of being and doing that mean people feel seen, valued, and they belong.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of accidentally ended up in this belonging space, I think.
Okay, so you found something that you're good at, you can sort of identify with in a way. You stumbled upon it.
I think, yeah, it was a sense of focusing only on the individualistic way of thinking about student mental health and well-being just hasn't been changing. Nothing's been changing really in terms of how we're responding. Not so much in how we are responding and how we are addressing student mental health. It continues to be a struggle for services for students, and belonging is a segue into that, I think. And if we can enable safe spaces where students and staff feel they belong within higher education, then it opens up new conversations in order to really address some of the injustices in the system. So belonging is a foundational step, I think, in the road to really addressing the needs of our students.
Okay, so can you tell us about some of the key findings from your research?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, what do I talk about? What do I focus on? There's so many things. I think one of the things that I've been really struck by is in every project, regardless of the context, the same points are coming out. There are nuances, obviously. There's ways that we can think about belonging differently. There are ways we can address and facilitate. But from, lots of my research has been in England, but I've also been researching with colleagues in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And what we find is at the heart is that sense of students and staff, when they don't feel they belong, feeling like the institution and the sector doesn't see them. It's not built for them. They're not given space and time to connect. And that manifests in lots of different ways. But there is a commonality there across time and space, I think, around how we have created universities as institutions and what that means for lots of people struggling to connect with those institutions. So on a broadest level, I think there are some real commonalities that we can take away as a sector. Another thing I've been really struck by is students and staff's willingness to share their experiences, actually. And I think we are sometimes do not give staff and students the credit we should around their ability to be vulnerable and share really personal things with us. And in sharing those, I think it is then our job as caretakers of that knowledge to kind of think about other ways that we can create systems and processes, other ways that we can create opportunities to connect and to belong. But within that, within my work, I'm also really struck that not everybody wants to belong to the university in the way that universities want them to.
Right.
So it is really important, and students talk about it being really important, that they find spaces to belong, that there are places and spaces and people where they feel that sense of belonging and community. But we should not confuse that with thinking that all students want to belong to our institutions all the time or in the same way. And I think there is a danger that with all of our research on belonging, the institutions take that as a blueprint for finding a way to kind of make students belong in the way that institutions want them to. Whereas belonging is a very individualistic experience. There are definitely commonalities, but it's an individualistic experience, and how that kind of manifests for each individual will vary. And I think it's not for us to dictate what belonging looks like, rather to create those opportunities.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying institution, that actually conjures up quite a sort of rigid image, doesn't it? And actually you've got to yield to the institution, and actually belonging is a lot more fluid than that, isn't it?
And I think that's the tension, that we are almost willing people to belong to something that is an institution. I use that word quite purposefully because historically we have been very rigid, and in lots of ways we are still very rigid institutions. And there are spaces and kind of little corners of our universities where people co-create opportunities to belong, and they have nothing to do with us as the university in some way, other than they're in a space and place because they're students with us. And I think we should value those opportunities just as much as we value some of the other things that we're going to go on to talk about. I'm sure that institutions or organizations, or the University of Leeds has done in order to help facilitate that belonging. I wouldn't want to undermine the importance of all of those other places.
Yeah.
Students talk about the impact of their accommodation on their sense of belonging, whether that be that they have flatmates that really have that sense of community and connectedness, whether it be the location of their accommodation, with commuter students sometimes feeling that they don't have that connection to the university, whatever that means to them. But then there are other commuter students who talk about online places that they've created. So there are all kinds of different ways that students find those spaces that aren't necessarily on campus, and they're quite often not spaces that are curated by us in that kind of formal way. Yeah. But that's problematic because not all students have that opportunity. Right. And it's when students don't find those places, my question always is, what are we doing within our day-to-day business as usual that enables students to find those opportunities without having to go out and seek them themselves? Because what I'm really concerned about is the 20 to 30% of students who feel they don't belong. What can we do differently to help them find that place of belonging while they're at university?
That sounds like quite a big number, 20 to 30%.
It depends on how you measure it, and where that and what on the spectrum you're seeing as not belonging.
Okay.
But when you speak to students, we have as a sector a large proportion of students who don't feel they belong. And we can talk about what that means, I guess. What does belonging mean as we go through?
Okay. So what activities and initiatives at University of Leeds have you been involved in then?
So I'll try and give like a bit of a variety, I guess.
Yeah.
One that people may have already been aware of is Creative Connections. So this program is now in its third or fourth year. I should have checked that before speaking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was born out of some work we did with students, where students were saying, actually, we would like to connect with people from a whole range of backgrounds and disciplines. But what we want is to connect with people who have a shared interest in a particular activity. So it's an extracurricular program. And what it essentially does is it brings students together with a shared interest in arts and culture. So that could be mindful movement. It could be knitting or craft making or photography. The students help to co-create the activities. And what you have is a series of opportunities with a facilitator to engage in that activity. What's important about Creative Connections? Well, there's a few things, but one thing is it's not the activity itself. The aim is not to become proficient in embroidery, for instance.
Yeah.
The aim is to find other people who are also interested in embroidery, and then through that shared experience of creating, the shared experience of coming together, then you can begin to make connections and find like-minded people in that particular context. And because it's not kind of boundaried to any particular group of students, it's not that you will only find other so-called international students, a problematic label, but international students. It's not that you'll only find so-called commuter students or working class students, which quite often our efforts across the sector have focused on particular student needs. Instead, you don't know who you're going to meet in there until you join. So the program is now run in partnership between the university and the Leeds Student Union. And I can share with you the link to the article and the evaluation that we've started to do. And what students are saying is it is really that connecting over a shared interest that helps us to build those meaningful connections. Yeah. It's not for everyone. It's extracurricular, so not everyone can take part in it. It's fully funded at the moment, so there are no costs in terms of materials or anything like that. And so that's something that I think I'm really proud of, and particularly when you hear from the student interns who've worked on it, from the student union and from the students themselves about the impact that it has made to them. It's specifically for students who haven't opted into other forms of extracurricular, like student societies, for example, or other things. It's designed for students who in October, November are still feeling that sense of loneliness and isolation.
Okay.
So that's one. If I go to another kind of scale, is our I Belong, I Matter survey. So this has been running for a number of years now at the University of Leeds. As everyone who does survey work knows, there's always a challenge with getting students involved and thinking about how can we make this work for students as well as for the university. But what the survey is essentially doing is looking to not only monitor changes in wellbeing across the cohort of students we're following over time, but it's also an opportunity for students at different points of the year to share with us their experiences of what's helped or hindered belonging. And we're awaiting the results in terms of the fuller cohort, because that's going to take some time. But what it really shows me time and time again is what we do as individual members of the university community makes a difference. That when we make small changes in our practices, when we make time to connect with one another, when we think about how we curate those spaces, then students notice, and those small acts begin to accumulate into something that enables that growth of that sense of belonging. And I think it's a really nice example of how that sort of ongoing evaluation and asking for feedback, while the ultimate aim is to see what's going on over time, it enables us to continually make improvements to our practices throughout it. So we're really fortunate at Leeds that the university has invested in that as a program, and we're continuing to take that forward. A few other things that we've been involved in, some of them are directly projects that have been co-created with students. So we have, for instance, I work in the School of Medicine, as I said, and it is difficult sometimes, or challenging, for our students of Black heritages to feel that they belong and that they have a place when they don't see a lot of people who look, sounds, culturally are similar to them around them. And a first-year student came to me 4 years ago and said, "Where are the Black doctors? How can I know what I can be if there's no one like me here?" So together we co-created the Black Mentoring Scheme, which is now in its third year, I think it is. It might also almost be going into its fourth year, where we have students with Black heritages, from Black heritages, mentored by NHS doctors of Black heritages.
Oh, that's good.
So they come together in groups and share experiences. The sessions are, as you might expect from a mentoring scheme, are decided by the mentors and the mentees together, what they'll focus on, what they will talk about. And students talk about the benefits they're getting from it in terms of being able to connect and feel that sense of I do belong in medicine. And the mentors also talk about how it makes them see that there is this growing community, and they wish that they had had something like that when they were training to be doctors. So that's a really quite a small scale project within one school of the university that is making a difference to students who self-select onto that program. We also have another student, Amy Wilson, who came and asked the question around, where is the LGBT representation? It's hard to find hard to feel that you belong when you don't see yourself reflected in the curriculum. And so together, Amy and I are working on the Queering the Curriculum project, which, amongst other things, is looking to develop a resource to support staff in embedding authentic representation of LGBTQIA+ people and patients. It's a School of Medicine project again, with the aim of creating a more inclusive environment for our queer community. We also have the Compassionate Curriculum Network at Leeds. So that's a space for staff to come and talk about a whole range of things. And amongst it, they talk about the belonging work that they're doing and how they can embed that into their pedagogical musings and plannings and teachings. And I talk about pedagogy in its broader sense. That includes all members of staff and students. And very lastly, I think we sometimes forget about the messages that we send out to students and to staff. And so we've had a strand of work for a few years now, which is looking at really communicating compassionately and to facilitate belonging. So we worked with the central media teams to think about how we word welcome messages and I don't know, around holiday times and observances, how those messages might be received by those not part of those groups or who we weren't speaking to. And through small tweaks and changes, I think we've been able to make a real difference in terms of not excluding people from the language that we use. And one of the things I'm most proud of, I guess, is the bravery of our student cases team, who've been looking at how they would correspondence with students and staff in order to ensure that even in those moments which are challenging and difficult times, obviously with student cases being involved, that they are remembering the individual on the side of those communications, and how tweaks in that communication allows staff and students to feel seen and valued, even at those most challenging times.
Could you just clarify what are student cases, please?
That's a really good question, Louise, and an example of where we use shorthand phrases all the time in universities. So at the University of Leeds, student cases is the team in the Secretariat and it administers the various university procedures for things like student complaints, fitness to study, allegations of academic misconduct. So when students and staff are interacting with student cases, it's quite often a time of heightened anxiety and stress, and the communications, for obvious reasons, I think, have to be framed in a way that meets legal requirements of those processes.
And
but
people
I'm
can
really,
get lost in that process.
People can get lost in that process, exactly. And so what the student cases have been looking at is, within that framework, within the way in which they work, how can they embed languages and ways of working that even in those moments show students and staff actually that they are seen and that they're valued, which is in part of the heart of belonging. And I think, given that we've been able to do some of that work, that shows that even in the more difficult corners of the university and of the sector, we can make those changes, which means we should be able to make them anywhere.
Yes, it's sort of recognizing the person. You're still you know, in amongst all of this that's going on, there's still that person, and we still see that person.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so moving on, how do you collaborate with support staff? You have just touched on that a bit, but how do you collaborate with support staff and educators to enhance belonging?
As you would have seen from the list of things I chose to share with you, and apologies if I shared too many, is that everything we do is collaborative. And I think it's really important that within that we are talking about support staff and educators as well. So as well as being formally involved in some of the projects that I've just spoken to, I think one of the things that we are always trying to do and trying to strive for is, in all of these spaces, to build a shared understanding of what belonging actually means. And when you're talking, you mentioned support staff and educators, that's a huge number of people, both within each of our universities, but also across the sector. And belonging means something different to all of us. So I think we need to have a shared understanding of what we mean by belonging within our context. And we also need a shared understanding of why it's important. I reiterate my earlier point about kind of surfacing that idea that we don't all need to feel that sense of belonging all the time. And no one should be excluded, because excluding people runs counter to belonging. And it's quite easy to kind of shatter that sense of belonging if we do things that are exclusionary. But belonging isn't something that's fixed. It's continually evolving, it's negotiated, it changes across space and time. And because it's dynamic, it means that there are different ways and places that we feel belonging. So before we started our conversation, I was thinking, what do I mean by different types of belonging? Isn't belonging just belonging? But if we think about it in terms of for example, personal or psychological belonging. We might have social belonging, institutional belonging, which is quite often what universities focus on, that sense of cultural belonging, academic belonging, being part of that academic community, which is something that students do talk about. And then there's also physical or spatial belonging, and I include online spaces to that as well. Now, that's all quite complex, and I think sometimes when this isn't your day job, you think you have an intuitive idea of what belonging is. And I think giving support staff and educators space to kind of explore what belonging means and to develop that shared understanding allows us to find those opportunities of where we can intervene. So the examples I gave with communications with the media team and with student cases, that came out of some of those spaces. I didn't identify those changes that could be made. We had a conversation about belonging, what it might look like to work more compassionately. And those teams found those spaces that they could make a difference. And we worked together to kind of work out how that might happen. So collaboration is key, not only because it's how you get things done, in my opinion, and we all want to build a better student experience and a better staff experience in university, but because without that collaboration, we miss all those opportunities, because my view of the university is only as wide as the spheres that I work in, and there are so many things that happen. And I also think that that's important because sometimes we equate a sense of belonging with finding someone like me, whatever like me means. But belonging is broader than that, and that sense of belonging can come in loads of different, sometimes surprising ways. And if we limit it to thinking of people in siloed categories, then sometimes that works counter to what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to use the example of international students. We sometimes talk about international students, and as someone who's an immigrant to the UK, I can completely relate to this as one thing. But in doing that, we fail to see the diversity in that group. And as an individual within that group, you then feel that you're not seen and you're not valued, and you don't understand why you've all been put together. That's not to say there's not times and places where those spaces are important. They can be. But I think getting staff to think about, giving them time to think about those sorts of nuances, they naturally begin to think about their own context and ways in which they could do things differently.
Right.
So for me, it's not only how do you collaborate with support staff and educators, it's why wouldn't you? I think you have to find those spaces, and you have to create those collaborative spaces, because otherwise we won't have the kind of holistic, whole institution approach to belonging.
Yeah. Yes. It's so obvious when you put it like that. So have you been able to measure the impact of your projects and research?
Yeah, and how that's happened has differed. So I mentioned Creative Connections. That was a formal research project that, as I said, we've published the findings of that. We did that via, I worked with an amazing colleague, Leah Henriksen, who is very good at creative methods of evaluating. So, and we thought that fitted really nicely within the context of Creative Connections. We really didn't want the evaluation to disrupt the ethos of the program. We didn't want to come in and kind of force a structure onto that. So we worked quite hard to kind of evaluate in a more creative way. And with some of that data that we collated, we were really fortunate to get some funding for student placement interns who were able to work with us on that data. So that was measured in a experiential sort of way. We were asking for people's experience. We are tracking belonging and well-being across time. I think that's the least interesting, actually, in terms of that. The I Belong, I Matter survey is in part about the university monitoring how changes in belonging are happening across time, and looking to see whether or not we're seeing any shifts, not only in terms of the scores, if you can score belonging, that students are reporting, but also in the types of things they're telling us. So what we would hope is that over time, when you put in a particular intervention, that you will get less comments about a particular thing that students were saying were hindering their belonging. Something else will pop up. I'm expecting something else to pop up. So we have some formal evaluations, and I'm very happy for people to get in contact with me if they want more detail on those. I think we also have some monitoring that goes on. So for things like the Black Mentoring Scheme, for instance, we have some internal evaluation that happens with that. And then there is, I don't think we should underestimate the power in some of the more subtle changes we make and the feedback that we get from staff and students. So as you're going around the institution, when you hear staff and students talking about changes that they've seen, to me, that's a real sense that this is no longer seen as a project, but it's becoming embedded. It's becoming part of the culture of the university.
Evolving on its own.
Yeah. And I think we need both. We definitely need the formal research and scholarship projects. We need to advance our understanding of the science of belonging. We need to advance our understanding of the nuances and how people experience and negotiate and navigate belonging. We also need to make sure that we're doing the work to make sure that's implemented at a kind of cultural level for the university as well.
Yeah. Great. So last question to you about the Creative Connections project. What advice would you give to other universities or institutions looking to build belonging through creativity?
I would say think about creativity in its broadest sense. We've ended up with some activities that our students said that they would like to be involved with, but I think there are lots of different ways that you can be creative. I would say remember that it's not about the creative act itself. It's not about the creative activity. It's really easy to think that if we put on a series of pop-up workshops that deal with, I don't know, salsa dancing or cookie making or whatever it might be, that will create that sense of belonging. I would think that people will come. They will have a good time. You may, in fact, have people that come along and say that, yes, this really does make me feel that I belong. But unless you've curated the space specifically to address the needs of those who feel marginalized, lonely, and isolated, then it probably won't have the impact that you want it to have.
Yeah.
So you need to keep those people at the heart of your planning, your processes. You need to talk to students and to staff. You need to think about how those spaces are facilitated and curated. There is absolutely space and there's a place for one-off creative events that allow people to get involved and create that kind of buzz around a campus. But those one-off events are unlikely to create that sense of belonging. It needs to be part of a sustained program, and you need to think about who facilitates those. We employ skilled facilitators for each of our workshops, and they are there not only because they're skilled at doing whatever they're helping the people to do, but also because they have the skills necessary to curate a safe space to make those connections.
To build that trust week on week.
And to build those relationships. So how creativity is embedded, scaffolded, what your aims are, you need to think really carefully about that. You could have two programs that on the surface look very similar, but they will have very different outcomes. So I think to really remember what your aim was. I would also say don't make assumptions about who's in the room. Ensure all students can participate. You know, we have some that are online, we have some that are in person. We have some that are within the hours that the activities take place. You really do need to work with your cohort, because what you don't want is to invite students into a space that you say is going to be curated for them and then be excluded. These are vulnerable people potentially. And then I would also,
then, isn't it? You've lost that opportunity to get that person.
Exactly. They trusted
engaged.
You in that moment, and you didn't care for them in the way that you said you would.
Yeah.
And I'd also say, although I'm really proud of Creative Connections, and I think it makes a difference for the students who are able to take part in it, not all students are going to be able to. We can't scale it to all students. And so alongside that, it's really important that you embed activity into business as usual, that you think about what are the touch points that students will see all the time. And then think about, are there ways of creatively building belonging in those spaces? What are the things people are curious about? People love finding out about people. We really do. We're social animals. And so think about how we can embed those opportunities into everything we do. And I think it is around changing what and how we work. And we need to consider our current practices and policies in terms of, are they hindering? Are they interrupting sense of belonging? Recognizing that belonging isn't static, so one-off things aren't enough. So bringing that sense of creativity and joy into everything we do, with the aim of fostering the possibility, the opportunity for connecting for those that want to take it, would be my advice.
Thank you, Bridgette, for joining me today. It's been really good to hear about your involvement with student belonging at the University of Leeds.
Thanks a lot, Louise. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Connected podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the rest of our extraordinary Voices of Belonging collection and stay connected.